it's Gretchen, and welcome back to my channel. Alright, it's time for another one of my piercing comprehensive guides. As always, these guides are voted on by my patrons, and this month, my patrons voted on the flat piercing. So all information in this video will be in regards to what a flat piercing is and anything else that you may want to know about it. If you haven't been here for one of my piercing comprehensive guides before, I break down information regarding a specific piercing into 5 categories. I talk about what is the piercing, the procedure and pain of the piercing, the healing and aftercare of the piercing, the jewelry sizing for that particular piercing, as well as jewelry options for that piercing. These guides are pretty much just like a very broad understanding of whatever that piercing is about. So if you are curious to learn a little bit more about the flat piercing, maybe you have one and you just kind of want to know a little bit more about it, or you've been thinking about getting one and would like to learn more about it, then this guide is for you. So the first thing, what is a flat piercing? So the flat piercing is located on the upper part of the cartilage within the ear, and it's below the upper rim or outer rim. So it's just below where a helix piercing would be, but it's above the area where, say, a rook would go. So just so you get kind of a better visual, I'll insert a picture over here just so you see the surface area of where a flat piercing typically goes. So looking at it, it's a pretty large area for you to place that piercing. A lot of people will do just one, but it's also kind of like the forward helix where you can do a single, a double, a triple, however many you want or can fit into that space. Currently, I just have one, but I do like the look of having multiples there. Now, this piercing doesn't necessarily need to go in the very middle of that surface area. Sometimes you'll see them closer to the outer ridge without being on the outer ridge. Sometimes you'll see them a little further inward to the ear, but basically the flat will be found on the flat surface in that area of the ear. Now, this piercing is somewhat anatomy dependent. If you look at this area on your own ear, some people have more curves in that area than they would find flat surface. So for me, I'm lucky in the sense that mine is relatively flat. It does curve as you get toward where a rook would be pierced, but for the most part, it is very flat for me. However, some people will see in their ear anatomy that they have a little bit more curvature to it, and at that point, it would be up to the discretion of the piercer as to whether or not that specific spot could be pierced. It's kind of like an industrial piercing in the sense that it is one of those ones that can be anatomy dependent, but also isn't as strict as an industrial piercing. Whereas you have to have the exact right shape for an industrial. A flat, you just don't want to do it on an area that could potentially be curved, because that's why it's called a flat piercing. It's on a flat surface. Because you want a flat piercing to be on the flat part of that cartilage. You don't really want it to be on the curvature of it. So now that you know exactly which piercing I'm referencing for this guide, now let's move on to the procedure of getting it done as well as the pain you may experience. Now, getting this piercing done is very similar to other ear piercings. The piercer will clean the area, mark the area, allow you to look at it and decide if that's the spot that you want. Again, because it can be a little bit anatomy based, the piercer is gonna know the best placement for it. However, do speak up if you're not entirely happy with it. And like other piercings, the piercer will use a single-use needle through the site. As always, I mention a clamp is up to the personal preference of the piercer. Some piercers feel more comfortable with the steadiness of having a clamp hold the specific area. Others would much rather freehand it. So if you get a piercing done and you notice that your piercer doesn't use clamps, that's not always a bad thing. It's just maybe they feel that the clamp is more of a hindrance than anything. Clamp usage is usually up to what the piercer is comfortable with. Now, I do have this piercing. I have one over here on my right ear. I personally didn't find this one to be painful at all, but please keep in mind that pain varies person to person. As I always say, what's painful to me may not be painful to you. What's painful to you may not be painful to me. I personally didn't think that this piercing was super painful. I believe when I did another video all about my experience, I gave it like a 4 out of 10, 1 being least painful, 10 being most painful. I don't usually give piercings a 1 or a 10. They usually fall somewhere in the middle, and for this one, I gave it a 4 out of 10 just because it is cartilage. So for me, cartilage piercings feel like they pinch. They're uncomfortable for a brief second, but after that, they're usually fine. I do think mine throbbed for about 2 hours or so after I got it done, so that's kind of where that pain came from. It wasn't wasn't necessarily from getting it done. It was just kind of like the next few hours surrounding getting it done, and that's why I had it at a 4 out of 10. I will say this one I found to be a little bit easier to get done just because it is a nice open space. There's not a whole lot of finagling with jewelry or to actually pierce the site like you would find with a rook, a tragus, or anything like that. Because it is that flat surface, it's out in the open. There's no like getting into smaller areas of the ear. It's also thinner cartilage compared to other spots of the ear. So I personally didn't think it was super painful to get done. It was super easy to get the jewelry in, but again, everyone's experience is going to be different. All right, let's move on to the healing and aftercare of a flat piercing. So much like other cartilage piercings, this one can take about 3 to 6 months to heal. Because it is a cartilage piercing and they are known to be pretty temperamental, it can take up to a year to heal. Cartilage piercings are notoriously a big pain to heal because when you think it's healed, you think everything's fine, all of a sudden it'll flare up and you're like, well, what the heck? The flat piercing is really no different. My word of advice when it ever comes to a piercing is plan for the longest amount of healing time and then be pleasantly surprised when it doesn't take that long. So I always plan when I get a cartilage piercing that it's gonna take like 9 to 12 months to heal, and then I'm pleasantly surprised when it falls within that 6-month mark. Now I will say this piercing is one that you really gotta be mindful of. I relate this one kind of to forward helix piercings in the sense that a lot of things will end up snagging on it that you may not have thought about. A prime example, we're wearing masks. I found that my mask will end up snagging on my flat piercing way more often than I would have anticipated. Luckily, mine is completely healed, so it may make it sore for a little bit if I just completely forget to be mindful of removing my mask or putting it on. But I do kind of say it's similar to a forward helix in the sense that things will get snagged on it way easier than other cartilage piercings. The main reason for this is because it's a more open piercing. It's a little bit more out there than other ones that are a little bit more inward to the ear, and this just makes things easier to get caught on the jewelry, especially early on when the jewelry is going to be long to account for swelling. So aftercare wise for this piercing, pretty much the same as you would find for any other cartilage piercing. The main thing you're going to do is your sea salt rinse. So you can either do a pre-made one or you can make your own. Pre-made ones that are pretty popular are H2 Ocean and NeilMed. I personally prefer NeilMed. I used to use H2 Ocean all the time, but it does have some preservatives in it, which is why I have swapped over to NeilMed, and that's my preferred pre-made one. However, both are fine to use. I never experienced any problems with H2 Ocean. I just prefer NeilMed now. However, if you do create your own, please make sure that you are doing the appropriate measurements. You will do 8 ounces of distilled or bottled water. Don't use tap water because there might be some things in tap water that will irritate a brand new piercing. And with your 8 ounces of distilled or bottled water, you're gonna take 1/8 to 1/4 of a teaspoon of non-iodized sea salt. You'll mix it together, and you can either stick your ear directly into the cup that you've made your solution in, or you can do like me and use a cotton round or cotton swab, soak up some of that solution, and then clean the area. A lot of people will tell you not to use cotton rounds or Q-tips. I personally have never had a problem with them. The main reason why people may not like it so much is because of the tiny fibers that can get stuck on the jewelry and cause irritation. The main thing I recommend is if you're going to use a cotton round or a Q-tip, just be mindful of that potential for the fibers to get stuck on the jewelry. Also make sure that you do not go over 1/4 of a teaspoon of non-iodized sea salt. Just because you put more salt into the solution does not mean that it's going to heal faster. In fact, it'll probably irritate it even more and prolong the healing process. Make sure you're also not overdoing your cleaning. Twice a day should be plenty. For me, I'll do it first thing in the morning and then last thing in the evening. However, you can do a third time in there if you notice crusties forming throughout the day, but I would not recommend doing more than that because it can dry out the piercing site since it is a salt solution, which can then irritate the piercing and, you guessed it, prolong the healing process. If you use a pre-made, you can pretty much just point it directly at the piercing, spray it, let it soak in, and then rinse it off. Same thing with if you make your own. Let it soak in there for a little bit and then rinse it off, because a lot of people don't remember to rinse it off because you don't want that salt to like harden around the piercing because then it'll irritate it and, let me hear it, prolong the healing process. When it comes to healing a piercing, please make sure that you're not using the following things: alcohol, Neosporin, or Bactine, products of that kind. Don't use them on a brand new piercing. Alcohol products dry out the skin, which you really want to avoid. Neosporin and Bactine prevent oxygen from getting into the piercing site, which is necessary for your piercing to heal properly. Also, Bactine, I always mention this, Bactine says on their website, do not put us on a piercing. If the company itself is telling you to not do something, it's probably in your best interest to not do it. As with any new piercing, don't mess with the jewelry. I know this is easier said than done, and then sometimes you just can't help it. Like if you're cleaning it and it wiggles the jewelry a little bit, that's fine, but don't sit there and twist it. That's not good for it. Prolongs the healing process. Just don't do it. All right, so now the last two parts are everyone's favorite. So let's start with jewelry sizing. What kind of jewelry size can you expect with a flat piercing? Now, much like other cartilage piercings, it's typically going to be pierced at a 16 gauge. Lengthwise, this one will most likely be pierced with 5/16 of an inch in length, which also equals out to 8 millimeters for those who go by that measurement. Now, you can keep it at 5/16 of an inch in length once it's healed. However, because it is that open area and because it does seem to snag things a little bit easier than other ear piercings, it's probably in your best interest to downsize to 1/4 of an inch in length once it's healed and you are able to do so. But if you'd rather it say at 5/16 of an inch in length, just be mindful that because of that extra length, it could potentially snag on something. But again, you can downsize eventually to about 1/4 of an inch in length, otherwise known as 6 millimeters for those that go by that measurement. Now, what are your jewelry options for a flat piercing? Unlike other cartilage piercings, you don't have too many options just because of its placement. Because it is toward the inner part of the ear, a hoop is going to be very difficult to put in there unless you got one with a really big diameter. And even then, it's going to be sticking out a lot. So the main type of jewelry that you will have in this piercing is a flat back stud, or you may even have one that's got like the ball on the back side. I personally prefer a flat back, but some people like to have the ball on the back. And again, hoops would have to be a really wide diameter just because of the placement of a flat piercing in order for it to reach the outer part of the ear. Now, the good thing about flat back studs, I mean, that sounds kind of boring where that's pretty much your only option, but the good thing about flat back studs is that they have a lot of intricate gems that you can have on the surface. So even though it's pretty much you're limited to one type of jewelry piece, the gem that you pick, or like the style of the gem or the style of the stone or whatever it is that you go with, you can do a lot of different things with. So if you want something that's a little bit more flashy, look at like the shape of the gem and just make sure that it'll work with your ear. And as always, retainers will go in there as well. Typically you can just find a plastic or a glass retainer that's got a flat back. They're usually not too flashy or anything like that because that's the purpose of them. But yeah, those are pretty much your options for a flat piercing. So that is it for this comprehensive guide to flat piercings. Let me know in the comments below if you have one or you're thinking about getting one. What was your experience like getting one? I personally really like mine. I want to get something that's a little bit more flashy just because what I have in there currently is pretty standard. It's just like a single gem. I also will say mine is 5/16 of an inch in length, so I personally could size down like to 1/4 of an inch, and I probably should. I just haven't. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what your experience was like getting one, or if you plan to get one, or if you've been thinking about getting one and just haven't done it yet. Leave it in the comments below. And again, if you would like to vote on next month's guide, you can head on over to my Patreon and check that out. And that's where these topics get voted on. Special thank you to my patrons. You can help support the channel on Patreon while having access to videos early, view and patron-only content, and more. But that is it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a big old thumbs up. Go on down there and hit that subscribe button. Also hit that notification bell so YouTube can let you know when I upload next. But until next time, bye all!